Summer of 1944, under a sun so ruthless that it bleached the sky as white as bone, the Kansas prairies glistened. Cicadas were grinding their ceaseless song as the heat caused the air to tremble. The prison camp was surrounded by barbed wire that glistened like a thorny necklace. The convoy trucks rolled to a stop, and dust erupted from them. The metallic smell of motor oil blended with the dry fragrance of the wheat fields that stretched just over the gate as the brakes hissed. The universe seems both limitless and imprisoned. A group of German women got out of the rear of one truck. As if brutality would suddenly appear from behind every post, their clothes faded, their stances became rigid, and their eyes darted suspiciously. The first person to touch down was Liesl Hartmann, whose boots dug a little in the earth. She exuded the fragile defiance of a much older person at the age of 19. She maintained her disciplined stance while working as a nurse's assistant for the German Red Cross. She had a tight braid at the back of her head, a cocky grin, and a keen stare, as if she might be protected by command alone. She anticipated spitting, jeers, and maybe even a rifle butt across the back. "Remember, never let them see you afraid," she whispered to Anna Vogel, who was just behind her. Anna nodded faintly and adjusted her round spectacles. Before the war changed her life into something she could no longer recognize, she was a school teacher at the age of 26. Her sole valuable item, a little diary with pages already partially filled with looping, meticulous handwriting, was in a bag she carried. Anna had a quieter strength, an innate ability to watch, to document, to persevere by taking in every detail, whereas Liesl was a beacon of resistance. So this is captivity, she thought as she observed the guard towers, the gates, and the sun-bleached American flag flapping in the sky. Captain James Whittaker watched the newcomers from the shade of a guard post. Despite his uniform sticking to his shoulders in the heat, he maintained a composed and steady look. Whittaker was a man who had been beaten by authority. Eyes etched with lines of weariness and alertness, early 40s. He had silently borne the ghosts of the previous battle he had fought in France. Despite his belief that discipline was essential, he frequently claimed that harshness was a dull instrument that could only engender resentment. His motivations were more complex, despite his commander's warning to treat the enemy with respect, or the Geneva Convention would bite back when American boys were captured overseas. He thought that kindness may be more powerful than iron. As the guards gathered the ladies for processing, they filed in line, boots thudding, guns slinging. One of them, Private Robert Bobby Malone, was just 20 years old, had freckles on his nose, and spoke with a molasses-thick Texan drawl. He had been taken from a cotton field by the war and placed in this peculiar role of protecting German ladies, who, to his astonishment, did not appear all that different from females in his native country. His eyes lingered on Liesl for too long, and she snapped her head around, her mouth clenched, as though his look itself were offensive. When the women saw the doors of the mess hall open wide, their steps slowed. They were stopped short by the scent that wafted from within. Coffee, yeast, something warm and delicious that no jail should have to provide. Unbelievably, a pitcher of Coca-Cola with its black fizz catching the sunshine was taken out on a tray balanced with bowls, steam rising. Bobby smiled as he placed a cone, a dollop of homemade ice cream prepared from condensed milk and Coca-Cola syrup, on the railing. With a half-joke, half-respect tone, he yelled out, "Ladies!" Liesl stopped. Her ribs were thudded by her heart. Ice cream. Chains, derision, and hunger tearing at her bones were what she had anticipated. "A trick," she muttered in German at Anna. However, Anna's gaze softened. "They want to soften us before they strike. Even a trick can taste real," she murmured back, taking in the delicious sugary aroma wafting across the yard. They were given food one by one, a dish of cornbread and beans, a spoon forced into a calloused hand, a little scoop of that weird fizzing ice cream. The women paused, looking at each other as if they were awaiting approval. Whitaker nodded curtly at it. "Eat," he urged plaintively. The initial taste was nearly intolerable. Initially rejecting, Lae'zel clenched her jaw before allowing the spoon to contact her lips. A flavor associated with the enemy's abundance flooded her tongue, cold and effervescent. Her eyes stung with tears of embarrassment rather than happiness. How could compassion ruin me more quickly than cruelty? So that no one could see her face, she turned it away. Anna, on the other hand, took her time and wrote in her head in silence. "I imagined being in prison would taste like ash and iron. Rather, it tastes like fizz and sugar." The recollection was stashed away until her journal's next page. The guards anticipated complaints, laughing, and perhaps opposition. Instead, cicadas and the sporadic, tense clink of spoon on tin were the only sounds to break the hush that descended upon the women while they ate. It seemed as if any loud phrase may break the delicate air. Then a young German auxiliary, shocked by the icy shock of ice cream on her teeth, exploded with laughter from the far end of the seat. Bobby said, "Well, guess prison ain't half bad, huh?" with a snort in response. There was a little fracture in the tension. Even though they immediately covered it, several of the women managed to smile. Whitaker came forward as the supper was over. His tone was one of authority without hate. "Here, you will be handled in accordance with the regulations. You labor, you obey, you maintain discipline, you eat, and you relax. No more, no less." He stopped to look them in the eyes and let the promise of justice to fully register. Then, in an almost exhausted tone, he said, "You are ladies, but you are also prisoners of war. Keep both in mind." Inside the tiny bunks of the wooden barracks, Lae'zel lay awake that night, gazing at the rafters. She could hear the others breathing steadily and the sound of feet shuffled outside when guards switched positions. She could still taste the sweetness, sharp as treachery. "It won't last," she muttered, pressing her fists over her face. "This type of stuff never lasts." Anna opened her journal in the dim light of a smuggled candle a few bunks away. She wrote, "Today I expected hatred," with a gentle scratch of her pencil. "I was given ice cream instead. I'd be happy to be duped if America wanted to deceive us." She sighed and put the book to her bosom, closing it after saying, "The fences are high, but for a moment they tasted like nothing at all." Whitaker was sitting at his desk across camp, pouring himself a measure of bourbon and unbuckling his collar. His desk was overflowing with reports from Europe about cities being destroyed, battles being lost, and the constant grind of war. When the women enjoyed the ice cream, he imagined their gaze. He recalled a time when his 6-year-old daughter had asked him if the lady opponents would weep as they slept. They need to be handled carefully since he had instructed her that they should. He now questioned whether he had been talking to himself more than to her. Meanwhile, Bobby sang a song from home while leaning on the barracks wall outside. Still smiling at the thought of the women's shocked expressions, he tapped the butt of his rifle against the ground. He whispered, "German or not, a smile's a smile." He was unaware of Lae'zel's shadow at the window crack, observing him with questions in her eyes that she wouldn't allow herself to ask. Above the plains, the stars shone brightly and fiercely as the night became darker. The fences, which held both sides in a precarious equilibrium, appeared silver in the moonlight. Kindness and distrust had first met inside those lines, circling one another like tired dancers. At last, Lae'Celle closed her eyes, her heart torn between want and fear. She had the tiniest shudder of something new, something perilously near hope, for the first time since captivity. But under her cover, she squeezed her hands even harder when it churned, because she was aware that the cruelest deception of all may be optimism, and the conflict continued to rage somewhere beyond those glittering gates, ready to destroy kindness. Both the guards and the inmates were roused into weariness by the flat metallic cry of the morning bell, which clanged against the motionless air. Before the sun had fully risen, the German ladies in the barracks drew themselves up from thin beds, their breath steaming slightly in the early frost. The slight sweetness of cornbread drifted over the yard from the mess hall, mingled with the lingering smell of people, soap, and hay. Though rhythm did nothing to ease the pain of incarceration, life behind the wire had started to find its groove. Anna Vogel carefully folded her blanket and adjusted her spectacles, making sure that every corner lined up as though self-control could hold her in place. Before the work call, she opened her diary and made a brief entry. More loud than cicadas, the fences sing their own tune. They tell us every morning that the world is just out of grasp. She put the book away and concealed it in her bag. She wrote more than she remembered. It was a form of defiance, a means of asserting something that the fences were unable to hold. Liesl Hartmann walked faster, pulling her hair back in a braid. She made a line with her lips. Her chin was up, her stance straight, as if she were still in uniform. But her restlessness was evident in her eyes. She detested the regularity, the tidy bunks, the well-organized meals, and the vigilant guards. Every act of goodwill was a practice run for treachery in her thoughts. "They laugh because they think we are broken," she whispered to Anna when she overheard the guards outside joking in English. "Or perhaps because they are trying not to think about war at all," Anna said gently, wiping a wrinkle off her skirt. Captain Whitaker went across the yard outside, his shadow extending far into the faint morning light. He nodded to the guards, checked the lines, and then stood at the front as the assignments were read out loud. He never raised his voice and spoke in a calm, thoughtful manner. He thought respect could be earned simply by maintaining order. He saw harshness as a sign of weakness and a tactic used by lazy people. Nevertheless, he maintained a sharp eye and a polished handgun because kindness without watchfulness was a door left open. The women were dispersed among several jobs. While doing washing, several people scrubbed American uniforms until the cold water made their fingers pucker. Others peeled countless baskets of potatoes or repaired ripped garments. Because of her medical background, Lae'Celle was placed in the infirmary. She treated minor injuries, cleaned tools, and saw American guards arriving for medical attention. She felt a twinge of irony. She used to proudly care for German troops, but now she was cleaning her enemy's knuckles of blood. Her hands continued to work precisely, though, unwilling to reveal the confusion in her mind. Bolts of rough cloth were arranged in tidy towers in the sewing room, where Anna's group was directed. A continuous reminder of time passing was the droning hum of the sewing machines. The repetition gave her a peculiar sense of comfort, and she continued to work even as her thoughts drifted. She once sang a German ballad under her breath while she adjusted the thread. She was surprised when one of the soldiers outside the door began to whistle a melody of his own, an American hymn she was unfamiliar with after he had tapped along with a beat. Before each went silent once more, their melodies clashed, somehow harmonized yet alien. The camp settled into a more subdued pace as the sun began to beat down around lunchtime. The women were seated at long wooden tables in the mess hall, with cornbread heaped next to them and dishes boiling with beans. Tin cups clattered against Coca-Cola bottles, the black beverage a novelty that never lost its oddness. While some sucked with covert pleasure, others sipped warily. Lae'zel usually drank rapidly, as though she wanted to get rid of the proof. In the meantime, Anna examined the bubbles and made notes in her diary. The beverage has the taste of laughter, making it a weapon unto itself, possibly one that disarms without the use of firearms. Private Bobby Malone grinned as he watched, leaning comfortably at the door. He said to another guard, "I never imagined the day would come when Germans would be fussing over cornbread like it was gold." Lae'zel shook her head, reluctant to concede, while one of the ladies mumbled in German, "They think we are children." Anna translated gently, but added, "Maybe they see us as human instead." The afternoons were lengthy. Under security, the ladies harvested wheat in the fields immediately outside the barracks. Irony ached at the sight of golden acres sweeping into the horizon. Even though it was inaccessible, home was as fertile and golden. "Freedom looks the same everywhere," Lae'zel said, pausing briefly to stare at the boundless horizon. Who has the keys makes a difference. For their part, the Americans continued to strike an odd balance between formality and humor. Others stood back, their eyes icy. Others spoke to each other, tried broken German, or made awkward jokes. Bobby was one of the latter. He once threw a ball toward the women and pantomimed a swing after it rolled across the yard from the guards' baseball game. He was received with interested looks. Finally, one of the auxiliary grabbed the bat he offered and swung it backward with all her strength, almost hitting him in the head. Startled laughter erupted in the yard. Even Lae'zel smiled grudgingly before rehardening her expression. Whitaker took careful note of these little interactions. He let music play in the nights, with Glenn Miller's horns slicing through the twilight as he drifted over the camp. It made people feel better, but he was aware that being too close may compromise discipline. His police interrogated him over cigars one evening. One person commented, "You're spoiling them." "Better spoiled than savage," Whitaker said calmly. "People turn into animals when you treat them like such." His remarks put an end to discussion, but uneasiness persisted. "You treat them with humanity. They give you order." It wasn't all bright. Like shadows, rumors moved around the camp. Through radios and whispers, word spread of German withdrawals and Allied wins. Every applause on the other side of the fence served as a reminder of what had been lost. Some ladies covered their sorrows with flimsy covers and grieved in silence at night. Others were furious, holding on to their old allegiances and muttering prayers for Hitler's deliverance. Under the blankets, Lae'zel balled her hands, caught between rage and the nagging doubt. During rest hour one evening, Anna gently confessed as they were sitting at the side of the fence. Gazing over the beautiful meadows, she remarked, "I believe that kindness is more terrifying than cruelty. Cruelty is understandable. If you fight against it, you'll live. However, kindness..." Her voice trailed off as she scratched faintly in her journal with her pencil. "Being kind makes you question what else was false." Liesel whirled around. "Don't fall for their tricks." Anna shut her book and said, "They feed us now, but they will send us back to ruins. And hatred does not soften ruins. We can at least keep this in mind." The fences themselves turned into a paradox, barriers that both protected and constricted. War continued to rage beyond them. Life in them had a beat that was somehow softer than anticipated. The women heard the lowing of livestock, the distant whistling of trains, and the quiet mutter of guards at night. They might occasionally nearly forget they were inmates in the silence before morning. The click of a rifle, the shadow of a tower, and the silvery barbed wire in the moonlight, however, were the constant reminders. Every act of compassion has a steel edge. The awareness that it may be taken away plagued every moment of laughing. The ladies started to shift as the summer wore on, in subtle but noticeable ways. Once stern with distrust, Liselle was now humming absently as she scrubbed floors. After starting her notebook as a record-keeping tool, Anna now filled its pages with observations, analogies, and even optimism. The guards also become softer. At one point, Bobby stole a peach from the officers' mess and slipped it across the bench in Liselle's direction. She bit into the apple after staring at it with her lips pressed together. As juice trickled down her chin, Bobby gave her a handkerchief while giggling. They were just two young folks enjoying the pleasure of summer for a few seconds. However, the sweetness was always accompanied by bitterness. Liselle stayed awake that night, reliving the peach's flavor and berating herself for indulging in it. "They are the enemy," she said into the darkness. But her heart betrayed her, holding on to the memories of laughing, sunshine, and the soft flesh of the peach. "Remember that." Sensing her friend's change, Anna wrote by candlelight. "Perhaps captivity is a mirror rather than the iron chain we imagined. Our own actions determine what we see, not the guards." Whitaker lingered over the daily rations list while going over reports in his office. He was struck by a silent irony. The inmates consumed 3,000 calories per day, which was sometimes more than what ration stamps from relatives outside the fence could buy. When these ladies returned to a starving and broken Germany, he pondered what might happen. Would they bury them in shame, or would they recount tales of Coca-Cola and peaches? Contradictions pressed down on him as he took another swallow of bourbon. That night, as the sky ached into dusk, the cicadas' droning chant became louder. The ladies lay in their bunks, each engulfed in an own maelstrom of regret, remorse, and grudging thankfulness. Uncompromising, yet oddly protective, the walls flashed silver in the moonlight, enclosing them in a world that was neither freedom nor the horror they had feared. And Anna felt the slightest tremble of discomfort as she sighed and closed her diary. She understood that compassion could not endure forever, and when it was over, its absence may cause more pain than any amount of brutality. With the ink still smelling of new print, the first images were sneaked past the gates, wrapped inside newspapers. Behind wire, they displayed skeleton beings with sunken eyes and stick-like limbs covered in striped fabric. In startled silence, the ladies in the Kansas camp gazed at the pictures. They had thought for days that the American reports were propaganda, exaggerated, and intended to deceive them. The truth, however, was staring back at them in this black and white grain: mountains of dead, concentration camps, and smoke spewing from chimneys unrelated to enterprises. With her throat constricted, Anna Vogel drew one image with her finger. Back in Bavaria, she had taught her students about sacrifice, devotion, and the fatherland. She could feel her teachings disintegrating into ash now. She closed her diary without writing, thinking, maybe we deserve to be prisoners if this is what Germany has done. For once, she was rejected by words. Liesl Hartmann's anger concealed his anxiety. Even as her voice wavered, she spit out, "Lies! They make us think our country is terrible, so we will forget who we are." Nevertheless, she woke up that night seeing the faces in the pictures. She wished them away by pressing her fingers over her eyes, but they persisted. Compared to the tragedy back home, mercy in Kansas tasted like treachery. The guard struggled with dissonance as well. Private Bobby Malone's youthful smile wavered as he gazed at the pictures for longer than he acknowledged. In Italy, his brother was engaged in combat. It unnerved him to think of him trudging through muck while Bobby stood here protecting Coca-Cola drinking chicks. "Sometimes I think these prisoners eat better than I do," he wrote home. However, after reading the articles about Germany, I question whether feeding them properly isn't the best kind of punishment. With his customary tact, Captain Whitaker managed the situation. One evening, with the pictures strewn all over his desk, he assembled the guards. "Remember what you were told," he said. "Those camps were not designed by these inmates. They are parts of a machine that they did not construct." His hands whitened as he folded the papers, but his voice remained composed. "We treat them well, not because they deserve it, but because we must be better than the world they left behind." Life went on as usual, but something had changed. The women took slower steps while working in the fields. They became less chatty. The evening music had a darker feel with a hint of melancholy in Glenn Miller's trumpet sounds. Once more, Anna noted little details, such as how the wheat bowed in the wind like heads bowed in prayer, and how the sky appeared to be excessively large. As if the fences themselves had taken on the role of instructors, her comments now held less opposition and more contemplation. One scorching afternoon, when Bobby gave her another peach, Liesl clutched more firmly to her stubbornness. After accepting it, she unnecessarily threw the pit into the ground. Even though the sweetness had remained on her tongue, she whispered, "I will not be tamed by fruit." Bobby felt the storm behind her words and laughed awkwardly. He answered, "Suit yourself." But he couldn't help but think about her eyes, which were filled with a mixture of pain and love rather than just anger. Through gaps, cultural interactions infiltrated like weeds. During their tour, the American spouses appreciated the German-patterned linens that the women sewed. The guards taught them English phrases like thank you, good morning, and baseball. The term Coca-Cola evolved into a language unto itself, requiring no translation. The yard was filled with laughter as one of the auxiliary attempted swing dancing for the first time while being observed by delighted troops. Despite swiftly biting her lip to conceal it, Liesl couldn't help but smile, but it was risky to laugh. Some people preferred sharp edges, but it softened them. There were rumors that this generosity was not universally embraced by Americans. One letter to the War Department said, "You're wasting sugar on enemies while your neighbors ration." Whitaker watched the ashes curl as he burnt these letters in his office heater. He thought it was a good idea to feed them, house them, and show them what America was like. They would one day transport tales back over the Atlantic, and those tales may sow seeds more potent than any bomb. "I think kindness has undone me more than cruelty ever could," Anna said to Liesl in a whisper one evening as the lady sat by the fence during rest hour. Her words shook like a confession. "If those we call enemies treat us better than our own leaders did, it makes me wonder who we are." Liesl turned abruptly away. "Avoid saying that. You betray everything." Her own belief faltered, though. She recalled the lad, who was only 18, who mumbled Danke before passing away, the battered soldier she had previously cared for at a field hospital. What had he killed for if her nation had constructed the locations depicted in the pictures? Dreams were infused with the fight. One night, Anna woke up with her notebook in her hand and began to cry quietly. I felt shame heavier than chains when Whitaker's little girl handed me a cookie through the fence today, she wrote by flashlight. When your own people are starving, how can you ignore a child's generosity? She extinguished the lamp and lay trembling, her mouth tasting like sugar. The guards struggled with paradoxes as well. It's not right, feeling sorry for them, Bobby admitted to a fellow soldier. While I'm here making sure these girls get ice cream, my brother is bleeding out somewhere. His friend shrugged. Perhaps that is the purpose. We fight there to avoid having to fight here, but Bobby was still uncomfortable. It was meant to be a straightforward conflict between good and evil, but the boundaries were hazy here, behind the walls. Whitaker was the most acutely aware. He found himself observing the women while they ate, noting their guarded smiles at minor luxuries. "Do the lady enemies cry at night?" his daughter had asked, and he recalled that inquiry. He was aware of the solution now. Every morning he saw it in their red-rimmed yet resolute eyes. Even though he told himself every day that he was in charge of inmates, a part of him was unable to deny the obvious fact that they were also people who were trying to avoid breaking. The barbed wire was rattled by the autumn winds that blew across the plains, scattering leaves all over the yard. The days became shorter and the beautiful fields turned brown. As the season changed, there were fresh reports that the European war could be coming to an end. The women murmured about whether or not home was still there. A few held out hope for a reunion. The return to ruins was feared by others. "We are caught in a strange mercy," Anna wrote. "Life is complete within the fences. There are nothing but ruins beyond them." One afternoon, when Lae'zel passed out in the hospital due to tiredness, the strain reached a silent breaking point. Bobby, who was stationed close by, hurried in without hesitation and assisted her in standing up. "I don't need your pity," she said as she yanked away, but her legs shook and she slumped against the wall, gasping for air. Bobby stood clumsily with his hands half up. "It's not sympathy," he murmured quietly. "Just being human." The words hit her like a ton of bricks. Hating him for the compassion she could not deny, she averted her face and fought back tears. She said to Anna that evening, "I don't know who I am anymore. What does compassion make us if brutality characterizes our enemies?" Anna squeezed Lae'zel's hands with her notebook. "It gives us life." Lae'zel handed the book back after reading a sentence that stuck with her. "We win wars not only with bombs, but with bread." She lay awake, repeating the statement until she fell asleep. After that, the camp appeared to be quieter, as though everyone could feel the shadow of the war drawing nearer. Every moment was laced with anxiety, even while the women worked, ate, and even smiled. A seed of doubt had been sown by the photos, and it grew every day, altering identities and twisted loyalties. Whitaker, who was as solid as stone, sensed it too. "We think fences protect us, but they also reveal us," he wrote in his personal notes. "Mercy may be a deadly weapon. It penetrates more deeply than bullets do." Anna saw something strange one evening as the women gathered in the last of the light. A train whistle, a lengthy, melancholy sound that seemed to originate from another universe, resonated in the fields beyond the fence. Together, the women's pallid features turned their heads. Lae'zel's eyes were wide when he clutched the wire. That whistle was a reminder of impending transport ships, of displacement, and of an unknown future speeding toward them rather than a promise of home. The roar continued to vibrate through the air long after the train had passed, even after the guards summoned them back inside. The women saw then what the camp's goodwill had concealed. They wouldn't stay in the fences forever. Beyond, a broken world awaited their test in ways that neither Coca-Cola nor ice cream could soothe. Anna's hands were trembling as she closed her diary. The final words she penned before the lights went out. Sweetness is fleeting, and when it is gone, its absence may wound deeper than cruelty ever did, held a weight she was unable to articulate. Winter of 1946. There was a strange silence throughout the winter of 1946. Snow covered the roof of the barracks, softening the camp's jagged edges and drowning out the sound of barbed wire and boot clanging. Rumors too persistent to ignore were whispered by the German ladies within. Germany was split and shattered after the war. However, they stayed in Kansas, tethered between imprisonment and liberty. Finally, the news that repatriation orders had arrived shook the camp. Closing her journal, Anna Vogel pressed it to her bosom as if it may serve as a mooring for her in the impending storm. For months, she had dreamed about this moment, but now she felt uneasy at the idea of going past the barriers. Despite its simple walls and little beds, the barracks had turned into an odd haven. Beyond lay ruins, starvation, and defeated faces. In contrast, the announcement infuriated Lae'Selle Hartman. She had always thought of the camp as a gilded prison, and even cages with gilding were still cages. "Better ruins than fences," she declared firmly as she gazed out the window at the snow beyond. But when she continued, "If they still exist," her voice broke. "At least ruins are ours." The instructions were given by Captain James Whittaker with his customary composure, yet there was a weight to his voice. He assured the women gathered that they will soon be taken home. Weeks or even months will pass throughout the procedure. You'll depart in groups. His tone was unrevealing, but he stayed by the window thereafter, watching them scatter in slow steps, as though he too pondered whether release was kindness or cruelty. Until then, life goes on as it has. Bobby Malone, a private, responded candidly. He whispered to another guard, "Well, hell." He didn't mention Lae'Selle, but it was clear from the color in his cheeks that he would miss them all, even the one with the harsh tongue. Though he had never seen her barriers completely collapse, he had seen enough to get a peek of the tempest within. He was more uneasy than he could confess at the idea of her disappearing into ruins on the other side of the ocean. The cadence of camp life became bittersweet. The finality suddenly weighed down every familiar ritual, including the morning bell, the clatter of trays in the meal hall, and the soft hum of music in the evenings. From the glint of ice on the fence to the crunch of snow beneath boots, Anna meticulously documented every detail in her notebook. She was afraid she would forget and that no one in Germany would accept what she had experienced. Whittaker's small daughter returned to the camp one afternoon, wrapped in wool and her cheeks flushed from the cold. Through the gate, she came toward Lae'Selle with a little Coca-Cola bottle in her mitten-clad hands. The child's English was slow yet clear as she said, "For you." With eyes watering, Lae'Selle knelt and grasped the bottle with shaky fingers. "For home," she said in German, although she was aware that the term had become meaningless. Lae'Selle stared at the glass bottle as if it were a relic, but the youngster grinned and hurried back to her father. Quietly, almost sheepishly, the farewells started. In January, a group of ladies departed, packed onto vehicles that traveled across the icy plains. Both sides of the fence were covered with tears. With their breath ghosting into the air, the surviving inmates strained against the fence as they watched the caravan vanish. After that, the barracks was quieter, and the yard was empty, and the absence was evident. Departures persisted as the weeks went on. The idea that the camp may remain forever was eroded with each goodbye. Despite the brutal Kansas wind, Anna found herself clinging to Whitaker's solid presence and Bobby's uncomfortable jokes. She was afraid of what would happen in Germany: distrust, hunger, and stories written off as fiction. One evening, she told Laisselle, "They won't believe me. They'll believe that I created everything: compassion, ice cream, and Coca-Cola." "Perhaps crazy is safer than truth," Laisselle muttered back, laying still on her mattress. "It will sound like madness." Anna's name was on the repatriation list by March. A weird mixture of comfort and horror overcame her. She watched the sky become pink with dawn as she stood by the fence on her final morning in camp, journal clasped to her chest. Bobby shuffled his boots in the snow and came closer. His voice was quieter than normal as he continued, "Safe travels, ma'am." Anna nodded, holding back tears as he continued, "Write it down so folks don't forget." "I have already." Liesel felt empty when she departed. She had relied on Anna's calm words and her ability to carefully consider and soften harsh realities. Clinging to the fragile armor of defiance, she now faced the last weeks by herself. However, she felt fear rather than triumph when her name was ultimately called in April. Her ambition was to get away. Now, however, she was terrified at the prospect of leaving the peculiar mercy of the camp. It was a scathing goodbye, almost violent in its restraint. With her boots heavy and her satchel thin, she made her way to the vehicles. With his hands clasped behind his back and an inscrutable face, Whitaker stood close by. She pushed herself to look him in the eye as she walked by. She could see something unspoken in his eyes, remorse, maybe even respect. But he only nodded once, the soldier's farewell. Bobby tipped his cap clumsily from a distance. He called, "Be careful, Liesel." No order had ever stunned her more than hearing her name on his lips. With a little nod, she turned her head and, without turning around, got inside the truck. The camp was left behind as the convoy thundered off. As the days grew longer, the snow melted, and spring had already started to emerge by the time Liesel's ship anchored in Germany. However, the nation she had left was not at all like the one she had returned to. Hunger was visible on every face, cities were in ruins, and streets were covered in debris. The house has turned into a cemetery. Her stories were regarded with incredulity and even rage from the neighbors. They laughed when she brought up Coca-Cola ice cream. One lady spat, "Lies. We were starving by Americans." "And you're willing to mention sweetness?" Liesel became quiet, assimilating the information like a rock. Shame rose in the quiet. Forgetting felt preferable. Anna did a bit better. Her relatives accused her of being softened and corrupted by the enemy when she published excerpts from her journal. Her brother growled, "You desecrate the dead." She never opened the book again and put it away in a drawer. But at night, she clung to the words like a lifeline, whispering them to herself. Years went by. The camp vanished from memory, a tale relayed in bits and pieces that were frequently disregarded. Not all traces, however, disappeared. One summer evening, Anna, now older, sat with her granddaughter while the aroma of freshly baked bread filled the air. When she opened a can of store-bought regular ice cream, she saw the girl's joy as it melted down her chin. "Prison can have fences, But kindness has wings," Anna said, smiling softly and enjoying the sweetness herself. The youngster giggled, not comprehending, but the words lingered in the air like a blessing. Although she didn't talk about it much, Liselle also held the memories. An empty Coca-Cola bottle with a scratched but intact glass was the only artifact she preserved on her shelf in her later years. Visitors believed it to be a pointless item. She didn't ever correct them. She felt the bottle at night and recalled how it weighed heavier than chains when a youngster had put it into her hands. Whitaker never mentioned the camp in public. With his military record stored away and his service acknowledged but uncelebrated, he retired in silence. But he never forgot the pictures of those women, their mistrust, their slow softening, the tears as they left. He felt that he had fought his most significant fight with bread, music, and kindness, rather than with weapons. But he never spoke this belief out loud. Naturally, Bobby narrated stories in his own way. He chuckled at German females playing baseball over bar counters and kitchen tables, including the one who almost knocked him down with a reverse swing. However, he never mentioned the peach or the expression on Liselle's face that morning. He realized that some recollections were too sensitive to be shared. Treaties and memorials were not shaped by the camp tale, nor did it garner media attention. It dwelt softly on tongues that had previously only anticipated iron, in diaries, in bottles, and in the taste of sugar. Its strength lay not in size, but in symbolism, that even at times of conflict, humanity might show up in unexpected places, brittle but genuine, like ice cream on a hot day in a place intended for punishment. That story's last chapter is recorded in memory, in the way sweetness endures long after it has melted, rather than in archives or orders. The barbed wire was decaying amid abandoned fields, and the fences had collapsed. However, the kindness bestowed inside them went farther than any convoy. Whispers, notebooks stashed in drawers, bottles left unopened on shelves, and grandkids enjoying ice cream on summer afternoons without understanding why the flavor brought tears to their eyes were all places it dwelt. The truth was unbroken, like glass that had withstood fire. Even if the ladies had returned to ruins, their statements were questioned, and their memories were ridiculed. They had found something more powerful than fire and steel in the conflict of the two. Unexpected and undeserved mercy had been ingrained in their bones. Only once, in her latter years, did Liselle confess it to a nurse who inquired about the bottle she kept on her shelf. Her eyes remained steadfast, but her voice broke. The words echoed in the silent room, as strong as any triumph, as brittle as any memory, and as timeless as the honey that had once melted on her tongue in a Kansas prison camp. "That's what kindness tastes like," she added, adding that kindness outlasts battle.